Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better days. The maintenance bay of the orbital station hummed with the familiar sounds of machinery and life support systems. He had been working on the atmospheric recyclers for 6 hours straight, and his back ached from crawling through the tight service corridors. But the work was honest, and it paid well enough to send money back to his sister on Earth. The station orbited a gas giant in the Proxima system, serving as a neutral trading post between Earth and the various alien species that had reluctantly accepted humanity into their galactic community. Marcus had volunteered for the assignment 3 years ago, drawn by the promise of working with alien technology and the chance to prove that humans could be valuable members of the galactic workforce. Most of the alien species treated humans with barely concealed disdain. They saw Earth's inhabitants as primitive newcomers who had stumbled into space travel through luck rather than intelligence. The Zephyrians, with their crystalline bodies and telepathic abilities, considered humans mentally deficient. The Korath, massive reptilian warriors, viewed them as physically weak. The Nexari, masters of biotechnology, thought human engineering was crude and barbaric. Marcus had learned to ignore their attitudes and focus on his work. He understood machines in a way that seemed to escape many of the aliens. While they relied heavily on automated systems and artificial intelligence, Marcus could diagnose problems by sound, smell, and touch. He could coax life out of dying equipment and jury-rig solutions that shouldn't work, but somehow did. The station's chief administrator, a Nexari named Vex Thalan, had initially protested having a human on the maintenance staff. But when Marcus single-handedly repaired a critical fusion reactor that 3 teams of alien engineers had declared beyond salvation, even Vex Thalan had to acknowledge his value. The human had spent 18 hours inside the reactor chamber, working with tools that weren't designed for his anatomy, somehow managing to realign the magnetic containment fields by hand. Today had been relatively quiet. Marcus had finished the recycler maintenance ahead of schedule and was looking forward to a hot meal and maybe a message from home. The communications array had been acting up lately, but he planned to look at it tomorrow. He was packing his tools when the station's security alarms began blaring. Red lights flashed throughout the maintenance bay as the station's automated systems announced a security breach in the diplomatic quarters. Marcus frowned, setting down his toolkit. Security breaches were rare on the station, which was supposed to be neutral territory. The various species might not like each other, but they generally respected the station's protected status. The alarms cut off abruptly, replaced by an announcement in the melodious tones of Nexari speech. Marcus's translator implant kicked in, converting the alien words into English. All personnel report to designated emergency stations. Security teams to level 7. This is not a drill. Marcus hesitated. His emergency station was in the lower engineering decks, but the diplomatic quarters were on level 7. If there was a serious problem with the station's systems, his skills might be needed more urgently than another warm body in engineering. He had clearance to access most areas of the station, a privilege that had taken months to earn after proving his competence. He grabbed his portable toolkit and headed for the nearest transit tube. The corridors were filled with various alien species hurrying to their emergency positions. Marcus noticed that most of them gave him a wider berth than usual, their body language radiating suspicion and fear. Something had them spooked. The transit tube carried him swiftly to level 7. As the doors opened, he was immediately struck by the acrid smell of burned electronics and the sharp ozone scent of energy weapons discharge. The diplomatic quarters were in chaos. Security personnel from multiple species were setting up a perimeter around the Korath embassy suite. Marcus spotted Commander Thrix, the station's Korath security chief, near the embassy entrance. Thrix was nearly 8 feet tall, with scales that shifted from green to brown depending on his mood. Right now, they were a dark, angry red. Marcus approached carefully, knowing that Korath could be unpredictable when agitated. "Commander," Marcus called out. his voice respectful but not submissive. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Thrix turned, his reptilian eyes focusing on the human. For a moment, Marcus thought the security chief might order him to return to his post. Instead, Thrix's scales shifted to a slightly less aggressive orange. "Human Marcus," Thrix acknowledged. "There has been an incident. Ambassador Krak Thul has been murdered." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Ambassador Krak Thul had been one of the few aliens on the station who treated humans with anything approaching respect. The old Korath diplomat had even shared drinks with Marcus on several occasions, discussing the similarities between human and Korath engineering philosophies. Murdered? By whom? Thrix's scales darkened again. Unknown. The ambassador was found in his private chambers. The security systems were disabled and there are no witnesses, but... The security chief paused, his massive head turning to look directly at Marcus. "There is evidence that suggests human involvement." "That's impossible," Marcus said immediately. "There are only 12 humans on this station, and I know all of them." "None of them would—" "The evidence is clear," Thrix interrupted. "Human tools were found at the scene, human hair, human fingerprints. The weapon appears to be of human manufacture." Marcus shook his head. "Someone's setting us up. Any of those things could be planted." "Perhaps," Thrix acknowledged. "But the Korath Council does not deal in perhaps. They demand justice, and they demand it quickly. In 3 hours, a Korath battle fleet will arrive to escort all humans on this station to Korath Prime for interrogation." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Korath interrogation methods were notoriously brutal. Even if the humans were eventually proven innocent, few would survive the process. The Korath believed that pain was the most effective way to extract truth. "There has to be another way," Marcus insisted. "Give me time to investigate. I know this station better than anyone. I can find evidence that—" "There is no time," Thrix said firmly. "However, there is one alternative." Marcus waited, sensing that the security chief was struggling with something. "In our culture," Thrix continued slowly, "when the evidence is unclear, the accused may choose trial by ordeal. If they survive, they are considered innocent and blessed by the gods. If they die, their guilt is proven." "What kind of ordeal?" Thrix's scales shifted to an uncomfortable yellow-green. "The pit of Siren Kol. On our homeworld, it is where we send our warriors to prove their courage. It is a natural formation filled with Korath war beasts, savage creatures that we have bred for 10,000 years to be the perfect predators." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "And if I agree to this trial by ordeal? If you survive 1 full day and night in the pit, all humans on this station will be declared innocent. The murder investigation will continue, but your people will be free to go. And if I don't survive, then your death proves human guilt, and the remaining humans will be taken to Korath Prime for justice." Marcus looked around at the chaos surrounding the embassy suite. 12 innocent people faced torture and death because someone had murdered an alien diplomat and framed humanity for the crime. He thought about his colleagues, Jenny from Hydroponics, who sent pictures of her garden to her children on Earth, old Pete from Communications, who had been teaching Marcus how to play chess, Sarah from Life Support, who always had a joke ready to brighten someone's day. "How long do I have to decide?" "The Korath fleet arrives in 3 hours. You must choose now." Marcus closed his eyes, thinking of his sister back on Earth, of the message he had been planning to send her. When he opened them again, his jaw was set with determination. "I'll do it." Thrix's scales shifted to something Marcus had never seen before, a deep blue that seemed almost respectful. "You would sacrifice yourself for your people?" "If necessary, but I don't plan on dying down there." Marcus hefted his toolkit. "I assume I can bring equipment? Basic survival gear is permitted, nothing that could be considered a weapon." "This isn't a weapon," Marcus said, patting his toolkit. "It's just tools." Within an hour, Marcus found himself aboard a Korath transport ship heading for the homeworld. The ship's interior was designed for beings much larger than humans, making him feel like a child in an adult's world. The Korath crew regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. To them, he was either a murderer about to receive justice or a fool about to die for nothing. The ship's captain, a grizzled veteran named Gork Thal, had attempted to talk Marcus out of his decision during the journey. "Human," the captain had said, his massive frame filling the doorway to Marcus's temporary quarters. "You do not understand what you face. The pit of Sarenkol is not meant for your kind. The war beasts within have killed seasoned Korath warriors. You are small, weak, without claws or scales. You will not last an hour." "Maybe," Marcus had replied, continuing to check his equipment. "But I've survived things that should have killed me before." Now, as the transport ship descended toward the surface of Korath Prime, Marcus stared out at the alien landscape below. The planet was harsh and unforgiving, with jagged mountain ranges and vast deserts broken by scattered green areas around the poles. The atmosphere was breathable for humans, but the gravity was slightly higher than Earth normal, and the air carried a metallic taste that made his nose wrinkle. The pit of Sarenkol was located in a desert region far from any Korath settlements. As they approached, Marcus could see that it was exactly what Thrix had described. A natural formation, a circular depression in the rocky ground nearly a mile across and several hundred feet deep. The walls were steep and smooth, carved by millennia of wind and water into an inescapable prison. The transport set down on a landing platform built into the rim of the pit. Marcus gathered his equipment and followed the Korath guards to the edge. Looking down, he could see movement in the shadows at the bottom. Large shapes shifting between scattered rocks and scraggly vegetation that somehow managed to survive in the harsh environment. A crowd of Korath had gathered to witness the trial. Word had apparently spread quickly through their society. Marcus could see hundreds of the reptilian beings arranged around the pit's rim, their scales displaying various colors of curiosity, excitement, and disdain. To them, this was entertainment, a primitive alien about to be torn apart by their sacred war beasts. Gork Thal approached Marcus one final time. "Human, I offer you one last chance to reconsider. Choose interrogation on our homeworld instead. At least then your death will serve to uncover the truth about the ambassador's murder." Marcus shouldered his toolkit and checked the simple rope and grappling hook they had provided. "Thanks, but I'll take my chances with the animals. At least they'll be honest about wanting to kill me." The captain's scales shifted to what Marcus had learned indicated grudging respect. "Very well. The trial begins at sunset and ends at sunset the following day. If you are still alive when the sun touches the western rim of the pit, you will be declared innocent and free to go." Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath. The sun was already low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded him of home. He had perhaps 6 hours of daylight left, followed by a long night, and then another 12 hours until sunset the following day. Any advice about the war beasts? Gork Thal considered this. They hunt in packs. They are intelligent, patient, and cunning. They will test you first, probing for weakness. When they attack, they will come from multiple directions. Their claws can shred steel, and their bite can crush bone. The captain paused. But they are still animals. They think like predators, not like warriors. Good to know. The guards led Marcus to a rope ladder that descended into the pit. As he prepared to climb down, he heard a commotion among the watching crowd. A group of Nexari had arrived, led by Vex Thalan himself. The station administrator pushed through the crowd until he reached the pit's edge. "Human Marcus," Vex Thalan called out, his translator rendering his bioelectric speech into words. "I have come to witness your trial." "Didn't know you cared," Marcus replied. "I do not," the Nexari administrator said bluntly. "But you have been a competent member of my staff. Your death would be inconvenient. I have brought a replacement atmospheric recycler, as I expect to need it." Despite everything, Marcus found himself smiling. "Well, I'll try not to die just to make your job easier." He began his descent into the pit as the sun touched the horizon. Behind him, the crowd fell silent, watching as the small human figure disappeared into the shadows below. Many of them had brought recording equipment, expecting to capture the spectacle of another species' weakness. None of them expected what would actually happen over the next 24 hours. At the bottom of the pit, Marcus felt the weight of hundreds of watching eyes above him. The gravity seemed heavier here, or maybe it was just the psychological pressure of his situation. He could hear movement in the darkness around him, the soft scratch of claws on stone, the whisper of breath through alien nostrils. He set down his toolkit and began to take inventory of his surroundings. The bottom of the pit was roughly circular, perhaps 800 yards across. Scattered rocks provided some cover, and there were several caves or crevices in the walls where the war beasts might lair. A small spring provided fresh water near the center, probably the reason the beasts could survive in this environment. As full darkness fell, Marcus heard the first howl. It was answered by another, then another, until the pit filled with an alien chorus that made his skin crawl. The war beasts were announcing his presence to each other, coordinating their hunt. He pulled a small flashlight from his toolkit and examined the ground around him. The dirt was hard-packed, but he could see tracks, large paw prints with long claw marks. Gorkthal had been right about the size of these creatures. A pair of glowing eyes appeared in the darkness beyond his light. Then another pair, and another. Marcus Chen, human mechanic, was about to discover that sometimes the best way to survive isn't to fight the machine. It's to understand how it works and use that knowledge against it. The trial by ordeal had begun. The first war beast emerged from the shadows like a nightmare given flesh. It was roughly the size of a large earth wolf, but the resemblance ended there. Its body was covered in chitinous armor plates that gleamed dully in Marcus's flashlight beam. 6 legs ended in curved claws that looked capable of shredding metal, and its elongated skull housed a mouth full of serrated teeth designed for tearing. Most unsettling were its eyes. Not the simple predatory gaze of an animal, but something that suggested intelligence and calculation. Marcus stood perfectly still, his engineer's mind automatically cataloging the creature's design. Everything about it screamed efficiency. The low center of gravity for stability, the multiple limbs for speed and maneuverability, the armored hide for protection. This wasn't just a predator. It was a living weapon refined by 10,000 years of selective breeding. The war beast circled him slowly, staying just at the edge of his light. Marcus could hear others moving in the darkness beyond, positioning themselves. He counted at least 6 distinct sets of footfalls, possibly more. They were coordinating their approach, which confirmed Gorkthal's warning about their intelligence. "Okay," Marcus whispered to himself. "Think like an engineer. Every system has weaknesses. Every design has flaws." He began backing toward the largest cluster of rocks he had spotted earlier, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. The war beast followed, maintaining its distance. It was being patient, letting him move where it wanted him to go. That was interesting. It suggested they had hunting strategies more sophisticated than simple pack tactics. As he reached the rocks, Marcus quickly surveyed his surroundings. The stone formation created a natural alcove with only 2 approaches, exactly the kind of defensive position the beasts would try to drive him toward. It was a trap, but it was also an opportunity. He set down his toolkit and began pulling out components. His portable welder, a handful of metal brackets, some wire, and a small diagnostic scanner that could detect electromagnetic signatures. The watching Korath above probably thought he was preparing to make a final stand. They had no idea what human engineering ingenuity could accomplish. The lead war beast seemed to sense that something had changed. It stopped circling and fixed its intelligent gaze on Marcus's activities. A low growl rumbled from its throat, and it was answered by similar sounds from the darkness around the pit. Marcus began working quickly but calmly, his hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent years building and repairing complex machinery. He welded brackets to create a frame, then began stringing wire between them in a specific pattern. To alien observers, it might have looked like random activity, but Marcus was building something he had designed many times before, an electromagnetic pulse generator. The war beast took a step closer, its armor plates shifting as muscles bunched beneath. Marcus ignored it, continuing his work. He had maybe 10 minutes before they lost patience and attacked. The framework was coming together, but he needed more components. That's when he noticed something important about the war beast's armor. The chitinous plates weren't just organic. There were metallic elements embedded in them, probably iron compounds, that gave the material its incredible strength. It was a brilliant evolutionary adaptation, but it also created a vulnerability. Marcus smiled grimly as he connected the last wire. His device wouldn't win any engineering awards, but it would produce a focused electromagnetic pulse strong enough to disrupt the metallic components in the war beast's armor. The plates would become brittle and weak, at least temporarily. The lead war beast seemed to sense that its patience was running out. It lowered its head and began advancing, no longer bothering with stealth. Marcus could hear the others moving in from multiple directions. He activated his device. The electromagnetic pulse was invisible, but its effects were immediate and dramatic. The advancing war beast stumbled as if struck by an invisible hammer. Its armor plates, suddenly weakened by the disrupted metallic bonds, began cracking under the creature's own weight. Similar sounds came from the darkness around the pit, as the other beasts were affected. The lead creature let out a confused growl, shaking its head as if trying to clear its thoughts. The electromagnetic pulse had also affected its nervous system, which relied on bioelectric signals just like any other living creature. Marcus didn't waste time celebrating his success. He grabbed a wrench from his toolkit and advanced on the disoriented beast. The war beast tried to react, but its compromised nervous system made its movements slow and uncoordinated. Marcus struck precisely at the joint where the creature's neck met its skull, using his knowledge of anatomy gained from years of working on mechanical systems. The war beast collapsed, unconscious but alive. Marcus had no interest in unnecessary killing. He was an engineer, not a warrior. The other beasts in the darkness were recovering from the electromagnetic pulse faster than their leader had. Marcus could hear them regrouping, their growls now tinged with what sounded almost like respect. They had underestimated their prey, just like everyone else seemed to do with humans. But Marcus wasn't done yet. He quickly began disassembling his electromagnetic pulse generator and rebuilding it into something else. The war beasts might be intelligent, but they were still animals driven by instinct and conditioning. And Marcus had spent enough time around complex systems to understand that every system could be reprogrammed. He pulled out his sonic calibrator, a tool used for tuning resonance frequencies in mechanical systems. With some modifications, it could produce specific sound frequencies that would affect the war beast's hearing and potentially their behavior. While he worked, Marcus studied the unconscious creature at his feet. Its breathing was steady, and he could see that the damaged armor plates were already beginning to repair themselves. The metallic elements were realigning, restoring their original strength. It was remarkable engineering, even if it was biological rather than mechanical. That gave him an idea. Marcus began collecting samples of the creature's armor, carefully scraping off small flakes where the plates had cracked. If he could analyze the metallic composition, he might be able to create a more targeted electromagnetic frequency that would permanently disrupt the armor without harming the creatures themselves. A new howl echoed through the pit, different from the hunting calls he had heard earlier. This one sounded like a command, and it was answered by similar calls from multiple directions. The pack was reorganizing, probably trying to compensate for the loss of their leader. Marcus finished his sonic modifications and tested the device. It produced a low-frequency tone that was barely audible to human ears, but would be extremely uncomfortable for creatures with more sensitive hearing. He could use it to control their movements, herding them away from areas where he needed to work. The first test came sooner than expected. A war beast emerged from behind a large rock, moving cautiously but with obvious predatory intent. Marcus activated his sonic device, and the creature immediately stopped, its head tilting in confusion. The low-frequency tone was disrupting its ability to focus, making it difficult to coordinate an attack. Marcus began moving slowly around the edge of the pit, using his sonic device to keep the war beasts at bay while he searched for additional resources. The creatures followed, but they maintained their distance, clearly uncomfortable with the sound frequencies he was producing. Near the pit's western wall, Marcus discovered something interesting: the remains of previous trials. Scattered bones and fragments of equipment suggested that others had attempted this ordeal before him, though apparently without success. But among the debris, Marcus found components that could be useful: metal fragments, wire, and even what looked like a partially intact energy cell from some kind of alien device. As he worked to salvage useful materials, Marcus became aware that the war beasts had changed their tactics again. They were no longer trying to approach him directly. Instead, they were positioning themselves to cut off his access to the spring at the center of the pit. It was a smart strategy. They didn't need to kill him if they could simply wait for thirst to weaken him enough to make him vulnerable. But Marcus had anticipated this. He had noticed that the spring was fed by an underground water source, and his geological knowledge suggested there would be other access points. Using his diagnostic scanner, he began mapping the subsurface water flow by detecting the electromagnetic signatures of dissolved minerals in the water. Sure enough, there were several smaller springs scattered around the pit, probably too small for the war beasts to bother guarding. Marcus could access water without exposing himself to a coordinated attack. As the night wore on, Marcus established a rhythm of activity that seemed to confuse the war beasts. He would move to a new location, set up temporary equipment, collect resources, and then move again before they could adapt to his presence. His sonic device kept them disoriented, and his electromagnetic pulse generator prevented them from getting close enough to attack effectively. But Marcus wasn't just surviving. He was learning. Each interaction with the war beasts taught him more about their behavior, their capabilities, and their limitations. They were intelligent, but their intelligence was focused and specialized. They excelled at hunting and combat, but they struggled to understand technological solutions to problems they had never encountered before. By midnight, Marcus had constructed what he privately called his War Beast Management System. It consisted of several sonic emitters positioned around his temporary base camp, an improved electromagnetic pulse generator that could selectively target the metallic elements in their armor, and a series of simple mechanical devices designed to distract and confuse predators. The war beasts had adapted to some of his tactics, but they were fighting a different kind of battle than they had been bred for. Instead of facing another predator or a terrified victim, they were dealing with someone who treated them like a complex engineering problem to be solved. Around 2 a.m., the pack's apparent alpha female made her appearance. She was larger than the others, with more sophisticated armor and clearly superior intelligence. Marcus could see her studying his setup, trying to understand what he had built and how it worked. She approached slowly, testing each of his defensive measures. When she triggered a sonic emitter, She didn't retreat in confusion like the others had. Instead, she studied the device, trying to locate its source. When Marcus activated his electromagnetic pulse generator, she weathered the effects and kept advancing, using her superior size and strength to overcome the temporary weakening of her armor. This was the real test. The Alpha was smart enough to recognize that Marcus wasn't just another prey animal, and she was adapting her tactics accordingly. She was treating him like a territorial threat that needed to be eliminated. Marcus found himself genuinely impressed by the creature's intelligence and determination. In other circumstances, he might have enjoyed the challenge of such a sophisticated opponent. But right now, 12 human lives depended on his survival, and he couldn't afford to lose this contest of wits and technology. He activated all of his devices simultaneously, creating a cacophony of electromagnetic pulses and sonic interference that should have been overwhelming. The Alpha War Beast staggered under the combined assault, but she kept coming. Her armor was cracking, her nervous system was being disrupted, and her hearing was being bombarded with painful frequencies, but she refused to retreat. That's when Marcus realized what he was really facing. This wasn't just a predator or even a particularly intelligent animal. The war beasts had been bred not just for hunting, but for warfare. They had been designed to function in battlefield conditions, to push through technological countermeasures and achieve their objectives regardless of the obstacles placed in their way. The Alpha reached Marcus's position and struck out with one massive clawed paw. Marcus rolled aside, but not quickly enough to avoid the blow entirely. The claws raked across his shoulder, tearing through his jumpsuit and leaving 3 parallel cuts in his flesh. Pain flared through his nervous system, but Marcus forced himself to think clearly. The Alpha's attack had been precise and controlled, despite the technological interference she was experiencing. Her biological systems were compensating for the electronic disruption better than he had anticipated. But she had also made a mistake. By getting close enough to attack him, she had moved within range of his close-quarters modifications. Marcus triggered the final component of his defensive system, a focused electromagnetic pulse that he had calibrated specifically for the metallic elements in Korath War Beast armor. At point-blank range, the effect was devastating. The Alpha's armor plates didn't just weaken, they completely lost their structural integrity. The massive creature collapsed, her armor falling away in pieces. Underneath, she was revealed to be far less intimidating, still dangerous, but no longer the armored juggernaut she had appeared to be. Marcus stepped back, breathing heavily. His shoulder was bleeding, but the wounds weren't deep. The Alpha War Beast lay unconscious at his feet, her natural armor scattered around her like the components of a disassembled machine. The other war beasts in the darkness had fallen silent. For several minutes, Marcus heard nothing but his own labored breathing and the distant murmur of water from the spring. Then, gradually, the sounds of movement began again. But they were different now, cautious, respectful. Marcus looked up at the rim of the pit, where hundreds of Korath eyes were watching him. Even in the darkness, he could see their scale patterns shifting in what he had learned to recognize as surprise and confusion. They had expected their sacred war beasts to make quick work of a primitive human. Instead, they were witnessing something unprecedented. As the first light of dawn began to creep across the sky, Marcus began preparing for the second phase of his trial. He had survived the night, but he still had 12 hours until sunset. The war beasts now knew he was dangerous, and they would adapt their tactics accordingly. But Marcus was adapting too, and he was beginning to understand that this trial wasn't just about survival. It was about demonstrating something that the Korath had never seen before. Human ingenuity didn't just level the playing field, it changed the entire nature of the game. The unconscious Alpha War Beast at his feet stirred slightly, and Marcus found himself looking forward to what the day would bring. He had always enjoyed a good engineering challenge. Above him, the watching Korath began to realize that they might have seriously underestimated not just Marcus Chen, but humanity itself. Dawn brought with it a revelation that changed everything Marcus thought he knew about his situation. As the sun's rays reached the bottom of the pit, he could finally see the war beasts clearly in natural light. There were 12 of them, not the 6 or 7 he had estimated during the night. But more importantly, he could see that they weren't just random predators thrown into a pit for gladiatorial combat. They were a family. The unconscious alpha female had 3 cubs staying close to her side, their smaller forms pressed against her motionless body. 2 of the other adults showed signs of old injuries that had been carefully tended, evidence of social cooperation and medical care within the pack. These weren't savage monsters. They were intelligent beings with complex social structures, trapped in this pit just as surely as Marcus was. This realization fundamentally changed his perspective on the trial. The Korath hadn't just created a test of survival, they had created a tragedy. These magnificent creatures were prisoners, forced to kill or be killed for the entertainment and religious beliefs of their creators. Marcus looked up at the rim of the pit, where the crowd of Korath observers had grown even larger overnight. He could see recording equipment, betting pools, and what looked like vendors selling refreshments. To them, this was a spectacle. To him, it was now something else entirely, an opportunity to demonstrate not just human survival skills, but human values. The alpha female began to stir, her eyes opening slowly as consciousness returned. Marcus expected her to immediately attack again, but instead she remained motionless, studying him with an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. She was trying to understand what had happened to her, how her armor had been defeated, and why she was still alive. Marcus slowly reached into his toolkit and pulled out his medical scanner, a device designed to diagnose problems with biological life support systems. The war beast watched warily as he approached, but she didn't attack. Her cubs moved to position themselves between her and the strange human, but they too seemed more curious than hostile. "Easy," Marcus said softly, knowing that his tone would convey more than his words. "I'm not going to hurt you." The scanner revealed what Marcus had suspected. The alpha was suffering from malnutrition and several untreated infections. Her armor plating showed signs of stress fractures that had been developing over months or years. She was a prisoner being slowly killed by her captivity, forced to fight for the entertainment of beings who saw her as nothing more than a living weapon. Marcus made a decision that would have shocked the watching Korath if they had understood what he was doing. He began treating her injuries. Using components from his toolkit, he assembled a basic medical device capable of delivering targeted electromagnetic therapy to promote healing. The same technology he had used to disrupt her armor could also be used to accelerate cellular repair and fight infection. It was a technique he had learned while working on biomechanical systems aboard the space station. The alpha war beast remained perfectly still as Marcus worked on her wounds. Her pack watched from a respectful distance, their body language suggesting they understood that something unprecedented was happening. Never before had a trial participant attempted to heal rather than harm their opponents. As Marcus treated the infected gashes along the alpha's flanks, he began to understand the full scope of the injustice he was witnessing. These creatures had been bred for intelligence and combat effectiveness, but they had also retained their capacity for emotion, social bonding, and suffering. The Korath had created sentient beings and then condemned them to a lifetime of imprisonment and forced combat. The medical treatment took most of the morning, but Marcus could see immediate improvement in the alpha's condition. Her breathing became easier, her eyes brighter, and the stress fractures in her armor began to stabilize. When he finally stepped back, she rose to her feet with a fluid grace that had been absent the night before. What happened next would become legend among the Korath for generations to come. The alpha war beast approached Marcus slowly, her massive head lowered in what he recognized as a gesture of respect. She touched her forehead gently to his wounded shoulder, the same shoulder she had clawed during their fight. It was an apology, and more than that, it was recognition of kinship between two intelligent beings trapped in an impossible situation. The other war beasts began emerging from their hiding places, approaching Marcus with curiosity rather than hostility. He could see that many of them bore similar signs of neglect and injury. These proud, intelligent creatures had been reduced to living weapons, their natural behaviors suppressed in favor of mindless aggression. Marcus spent the rest of the morning moving through the pack, treating injuries and infections wherever he found them. He used every medical technique he knew, adapting technologies designed for machines to work on biological systems. The war beasts cooperated fully, seeming to understand that he was trying to help them. Above him, the crowd of Korath observers had fallen silent. What they were seeing challenged everything they believed about the trial by ordeal, about the war beasts, and about humans. This wasn't supposed to be happening. The humans should have been dead hours ago, torn apart by savage predators. Instead, he was demonstrating compassion and technical skill beyond anything they had imagined possible. Commander Thrix appeared at the pit's edge, his scales shifting through a rapid sequence of colors that indicated extreme agitation. "Human Marcus," he called down. "What are you doing?" Marcus looked up from where he was treating a deep puncture wound on one of the younger war beasts. "My job," he called back. "I'm an engineer. I fix things that are broken." "Those are not things to be fixed. They are sacred war beasts, bred for combat and trial." "No," Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "They're intelligent beings who've been forced into an unnatural existence. Look at them. Really look. They're not mindless killers. They're a family." As if to prove his point, the alpha female moved to stand beside Marcus, her cubs following close behind. The rest of the pack arranged themselves in a protective circle, not around Marcus as prey, but around the entire group, as if he had become part of their family unit. Thrix's scales turned an alarmed shade of orange. "This is not how the trial works. You are supposed to survive their attacks, not show them basic decency," Marcus suggested. "Not treat them like the intelligent beings they obviously are." The crowd of Korath observers began murmuring among themselves, their scales displaying colors that Marcus had learned to associate with confusion and uncertainty. Some were pointing at the war beasts, as if seeing them clearly for the first time. Vex Thalon, the Nexari station administrator, pushed his way to the edge of the pit. His bioelectric field crackled with what Marcus recognized as intense interest. "Human Marcus," he called down. "What you are demonstrating, this is not mere survival. This is something else entirely." "It's problem-solving," Marcus replied. "The problem wasn't how to kill the war beasts. The problem was how to coexist with them. Once I understood that, the solution became obvious." As the day wore on, Marcus continued his work. He repaired damaged armor plating using techniques adapted from his experience with biomechanical systems. He treated infections with improvised electromagnetic therapy. He even began teaching some of the younger war beasts how to use simple tools to help groom and care for each other. The transformation was remarkable. The pack that had spent the night trying to kill him now moved with a coordination and purpose that was clearly their natural state. They were no longer prisoners driven to madness by captivity. They were a family working together to improve their situation. By mid-afternoon, Marcus had accomplished something that should have been impossible. He had taken a pit designed for death and combat and turned it into a collaborative workshop where human and alien worked together toward common goals. The war beasts had begun showing him things about their environment that he had missed during the night. They led him to hidden caches of materials left over from previous trials, showed him the most comfortable sleeping areas, and even demonstrated hunting techniques that could be adapted for tool-making rather than killing. In return, Marcus shared his technical knowledge with them. He showed them how to use leverage and mechanical advantage to move heavy objects. He taught them to identify and work with different types of materials. He even began constructing simple machines that the war beasts could operate with their claws and teeth. The watching Korath were no longer just observing a trial by ordeal. They were witnessing the birth of a new kind of society, a collaboration between species that challenged every assumption they held about intelligence, civilization, and their own place in the galaxy. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pit, Marcus realized that something had fundamentally changed not just in his relationship with the war beasts, but in how the entire gathered crowd was viewing the situation. Young Korath in the crowd were asking questions their elders couldn't answer. Why were the war beasts capable of such cooperation? If they were intelligent enough to learn and adapt, what did that say about keeping them in captivity? And most importantly, what did this human's behavior reveal about the assumptions their society had made about other species? Commander Thrix appeared at the edge of the pit one final time, but his demeanor was completely different from his earlier agitation. His scales were a deep blue that Marcus had never seen before, suggesting emotions for which the human had no reference. "Human Marcus," Thrix called down, his voice carrying a respect that hadn't been there before. "The sun is setting. Your trial is complete. You have survived the pit of sarin coal." Marcus looked around at the war beasts who had become his collaborators and, in a strange way, his friends. What happens to them now? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Thrix looked around at the crowd of observers, many of whom were now looking at the war beasts with new eyes. The traditional answer would be that nothing changed. The war beasts would remain in the pit, waiting for the next trial by ordeal. But tradition had been shattered over the past 24 hours. An elderly Korath that Marcus hadn't seen before pushed through the crowd. His scales were marked with the ritual scarifications that indicated high religious rank. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades interpreting the will of their gods. "The trial by ordeal has revealed truth," the priest announced, "but not the truth we expected to find." He gestured toward the pit, where Marcus stood surrounded by the pack of war beasts in a scene that looked more like a family gathering than a gladiatorial arena. "The human has demonstrated that our understanding was flawed. These are not mere beasts to be used for trial and combat. They are beings capable of growth, learning, and cooperation. To continue treating them as weapons would be inappropriate." The crowd erupted in discussion as the implications of the priest's words became clear. If the war beasts were recognized as intelligent beings rather than animals, everything about the trial by ordeal would have to change. Everything about Korath society's relationship with other species would have to be reconsidered. Ropes were lowered into the pit, and Marcus began his ascent. As he climbed, he could hear the war beasts below him making the complex vocalizations they used for long-distance communication. They were calling to other packs, other prisoners held in similar pits across the Korath homeworld. Word of what had happened here would spread quickly. When Marcus reached the top of the pit, he found himself facing a crowd of aliens whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. Some looked angry, others confused, many simply thoughtful. But all of them were looking at him with a respect that hadn't existed 24 hours earlier. Commander Thrix approached him with what Marcus now recognized as formal military bearing. "Human Marcus Chen, by the ancient laws of trial by ordeal, you and all humans on Station Kepler 442 are declared innocent of the murder of Ambassador Krakthul. You are free to return to your duties." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "but I have a request." Thrix's scales shifted to indicate curiosity. Speak. I want to help redesign your war beast facilities. Not just this pit, but all of them. These beings deserve better than captivity. They could be partners, collaborators, even teachers if we approach them correctly. The priest who had spoken earlier stepped forward. You would share your knowledge with us? After we subjected you to trial by ordeal? Marcus looked back down into the pit, where the alpha female and her pack were watching the proceedings above with intelligent eyes. Someone framed my people for murder and almost got us all killed, but you offered me a chance to prove our innocence, and you honored that agreement even when the results weren't what you expected. That suggests your society is capable of growth and change, just like the war beasts. He turned back to address the crowd. Besides, I'm an engineer. I solve problems, and this feels like the kind of problem that could lead to something incredible if we work together. Vex Thalan pushed forward through the crowd, his bioelectric field crackling with excitement. Human Marcus, I believe I speak for many here when I say we would welcome your expertise, what you have demonstrated today. This has implications far beyond a simple trial by ordeal. As the Korath began making arrangements for Marcus's return to the station and for ongoing discussions about war beast welfare, Marcus found himself thinking about the larger picture. Someone had murdered Ambassador Krak Thul and tried to frame humanity for the crime. But in trying to eliminate what they saw as a threat, they had instead created an opportunity for unprecedented cooperation between species. The trial by ordeal had revealed truth, just not the truth anyone expected. It had shown that humans weren't the primitive newcomers that many aliens believed them to be. It had demonstrated that the war beasts weren't mindless weapons, but intelligent beings worthy of respect. And it had proven that cooperation could achieve things that competition never could. As Marcus boarded the transport that would take him back to Station Kepler 442, he looked out one final time at the pit of Saren Cole. The war beasts were still visible at the bottom, but they were no longer prisoners waiting for the next victim to torment. They were partners in a collaboration that would reshape how multiple species viewed each other. The real work was just beginning. There would be investigations to conduct, protocols to revise, and relationships to rebuild. But for the first time since this crisis began, Marcus felt optimistic about the future. He had survived the trial by ordeal not by becoming a killer, but by remembering what it meant to be human. And in doing so, he had given the galaxy a glimpse of what humanity could offer, not just technical skill or survival instincts, but the capacity to see potential where others saw only problems, and to build bridges where others saw only barriers. The transport lifted off from Korath Prime, carrying Marcus back to his life as a simple station mechanic. But he knew that nothing would ever be simple again. The aliens had thought they were testing human strength and finding it wanting. Instead, they had discovered something far more dangerous to their preconceptions: human compassion, human ingenuity, and the human refusal to accept that things had to remain the way they had always been. In trying to prove humanity's guilt, they had instead proven humanity's worth. And that changed everything.